exactly. Thank you for returning to this reading of chapters 6 through 10 of Edgar Rice Burroughs' classic novel Pellucidar. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and browse the playlists on Sci-Fi Classics. Now for the continuation of the story. Chapter 6, A Pendant World. The Mahars set me free as they had promised, but with strict injunctions never to approach Phutra or any other Mahar city. They also made it perfectly plain that they considered me a dangerous creature, and that having wiped the slate clean in so far as they were under obligations to me, they now considered me fair prey. Should I again fall into their hands, they intimated it would go ill with me. They would not tell me in which direction Hooja had set forth with Dian, so I departed from Phutra, filled with bitterness against the Mahars and rage toward the sly one who had once again robbed me of my greatest treasure. At first I was minded to go directly back to Anarok, but upon second thought turned my face towards Sari, as I felt that somewhere in that direction Hooja would travel, his own country lying in that general direction. Of my journey to Sari, it is only necessary to say that it was fraught with the usual excitement and adventure incident to all travel across the face of savage Pellucidar. The dangers, however, were greatly reduced through the medium of my armament. I often wondered how it had happened that I had ever survived the first 10 years of my life within the inner world, when, naked and primitively armed, I had traversed great areas of her beast-ridden surface. With the aid of my map, which I had kept with great care during my march with the Sagoths in search of the great secret, I arrived at Sari at last. As I topped the lofty plateau in whose rocky cliffs the principal tribe of Sarians find their cave homes, a great hue and cry arose from those who first discovered me. Like wasps from their nests, the hairy warriors poured from their caves. The bows with their poison-tipped arrows, which I had taught them to fashion and to use, were raised against me. Swords of hammered iron, another of my innovations, menaced me, as with lusty shouts the horde charged down. It was a critical moment. Before I should be recognized, I might be dead. It was evident that all semblance of intertribal relationship had ceased with my going, and that my people had reverted to their former savage, suspicious hatred of all strangers. My garb must have puzzled them, too, for never before, of course, had they seen a man clothed in khaki and puttees. Leaning my express rifle against my body, I raised both hands aloft. It was the peace sign that is recognized everywhere upon the surface of Pellucidar. The charging warriors paused and surveyed me. I looked for my friend Guk, the hairy one, king of Sari, and presently I saw him coming from a distance. Ah, but it was good to see his mighty hairy form once more. A friend was Guk, a friend well worth the having, and it had been some time since I had seen a friend. Shouldering his way through the throng of warriors, the mighty chieftain advanced toward me. There was an expression of puzzlement upon his fine features. He crossed the space between the warriors and myself, halting before me. I did not speak. I did not even smile. I wanted to see if Guk, my principal lieutenant, would recognize me. For some time he stood there looking me over carefully. His eyes took in my large pith helmet, my khaki jacket, and bandoliers of cartridges, the 2 revolvers swinging at my hips, the large rifle resting against my body. Still I stood with my hands above my head. He examined my put and my strong tan shoes, a little the worse for wear now. Then he glanced up once more to my face. As his gaze rested there quite steadily for some moments, I saw recognition tinged with awe creep across his countenance. Presently, without a word, he took one of my hands in his, and dropping to one knee, raised my fingers to his lips. Perry had taught them this trick, nor ever did the most polished courtier of all the grand courts of Europe perform the little act of homage with greater grace and dignity. Quickly I raised Guk to his feet, clasping both his hands in mine. I think there must have been tears in my eyes then. I know I felt full for words. The king of Sari turned toward his warriors. "Our emperor has come back," he announced. "Come hither and—" But he got no further, for the shouts that broke from those savage throats would have drowned the voice of heaven itself. I had never guessed how much they thought of me. As they clustered around, almost fighting for the chance to kiss my hand, I saw again the vision of empire which I had thought faded forever. With such as these I could conquer a world. With such as these I would conquer one. If the Sarians had remained loyal, so too would the Amorzites be loyal still, and the Calians and the Suvians, and all the great tribes who had formed the federation that was to emancipate the human race of Pellucidar. Peri was safe with the Mesops, I was safe with the Sarians. Now if Diane were but safe with me, the future would look bright indeed. It did not take long to outline to Gak all that had befallen me since I had departed from Pellucidar, and to get down to the business of finding Diane, which to me at that moment was of even greater importance than the very empire itself. When I told him that Hooja had stolen her, he stamped his foot in rage. "It is always the sly one!" he cried. "It was Hooja who caused the first trouble between you and the beautiful one. It was Hooja who betrayed our trust, and all but caused our recapture by the Sagoths that time we escaped from Futra. It was Hooja who tricked you and substituted a Mahar for Dian when you started upon your return journey to your own world. It was Hooja who schemed and lied until he had turned the kingdoms one against another and destroyed the Federation. When we had him in our power, we were foolish to let him live. Next time—" Gak did not need to finish his sentence. "He has become a very powerful enemy now," I replied. That he is allied in some way with the Mahars is evidenced by the familiarity of his relations with the Sagoths, who were accompanying me in search of the great secret, for it must have been Hooja whom I saw conversing with them just before we reached the valley. Doubtless they told him of our quest, and he hastened on ahead of us, discovered the cave, and stole the document. Well does he deserve his appellation of the Sly One. With Gak and his headmen, I held a number of consultations. The upshot of them was a decision to combine our search for Dian with an attempt to rebuild the crumbled Federation. To this end, 20 warriors were dispatched in pairs to 10 of the leading kingdoms, with instructions to make every effort to discover the whereabouts of Hooja and Dian, while prosecuting their missions to the chieftains to whom they were sent. Gak was to remain at home to receive the various delegations which we invited to come to Sari on the business of the Federation. 400 warriors were started for Anorok to fetch Peri and the contents of the prospector to the capital of the empire, which was also the principal settlements of the Sarians. At first it was intended that I remain at Sari, that I might be in readiness to hasten forth at the first report of the discovery of Dian. But I found the inaction in the face of my deep solicitude for the welfare of my mate so galling that scarce had the several units departed upon their missions before I, too, chafed to be actively engaged upon the search. It was after my second sleep, subsequent to the departure of the warriors, as I recall, that I at last went to Gak with the admission that I could no longer support the intolerable longing to be personally upon the trail of my lost love. Gak tried to dissuade me, though I could tell that his heart was with me in my wish to be away and really doing something. It was while we were arguing upon the subject that a stranger, with hands above his head, entered the village. He was immediately surrounded by warriors and conducted to Gak's presence. The fellow was a typical caveman, squat, muscular, and hairy, and of a type I had not seen before. His features, like those of all the primeval men of Pellucidar, were regular and fine. His weapons consisted of a stone axe and knife and a heavy-knobbed bludgeon of wood. His skin was very white. "Who are you?" asked Gak, "and whence come you?" "I am Kolk, son of Gork, who is chief of the Thurians," replied the stranger. "From Thuria I have come in search of the land of Amoz, where dwells Dakor, the strong one, who stole my sister Kanda, the graceful one, to be his mate. We of Thuria had heard of a great chieftain who has bound together many tribes, and my father has sent me to Dakor to learn if there be truth in these stories, and if so, to offer the services of Thuria to him whom we have heard called Emperor." "The stories are true," replied Gak, "and here is the Emperor of whom you have heard. You need travel no farther." Kolk was delighted. He told us much of the wonderful resources of Thuria, the land of awful shadow, and of his long journey in search of Amoz. "And why?" I asked, does Gork, your father, desire to join his kingdom to the Empire?" "There are 2 reasons," replied the young man. "Forever have the Mahars, who dwell beyond the Ledi plains which lie at the farther rim of the land of awful shadow, taken heavy toll of our people, whom they either force into lifelong slavery or fatten for their feasts. We have heard that the great emperor makes successful war upon the Mahars, against whom we should be glad to fight. Recently has another reason come. Upon a great island which lies in the Sojar-Az, but a short distance from our shores, a wicked man has collected a great band of outcast warriors of all tribes. Even are there many Sagoths among them, sent by the Mahars to aid the wicked one. This band makes raids upon our villages, and it is constantly growing in size and strength, for the Mahars give liberty to any of their male prisoners who will promise to fight with this band against the enemies of the Mahars. It is the purpose of the Mahars thus to raise a force of our own kind to combat the growth and menace of the new empire of which I have come to seek information. All this we learned from one of our own warriors, who had pretended to sympathize with this band and had then escaped at the first opportunity." "Who could this man be?" I asked Gak, "who leads so vile a movement against his own kind?" "His name is Hooja," spoke up Kolk, answering my question. Gak and I looked at each other. Relief was written upon his countenance, and I know that it was beating strongly in my heart. At last we had discovered a tangible clue to the whereabouts of Hooja, and with the clue a guide. But when I broached the subject to Kolk, he demurred. He had come a long way, he explained, to see his sister and to confer with Dakor. Moreover, he had instructions from his father which he could not ignore lightly. But even so he would return with me and show me the way to the island of the Thurian shore, if by doing so we might accomplish anything. "But we cannot," he urged. "Hooja is powerful. He has thousands of warriors. He has only to call upon his Mahar allies to receive a countless horde of Sagoths to do his bidding against his human enemies. Let us wait until you may gather an equal horde from the kingdoms of your empire. Then we may march against Hooja with some show of success. But first must you lure him to the mainland, for who among you knows how to construct the strange things that carry Hooja and his band back and forth across the water? We are not island people. We do not go upon the water. We know nothing of such things." I couldn't persuade him to do more than direct me upon the way. I showed him my map, which now included a great area of country extending from Anorok upon the east to Sari upon the west, and from the river south of the Mountains of the Clouds north to Amoz. As soon as I had explained it to him, he drew a line with his finger, showing a sea coast far to the west and south of Sari, and a great circle which he said marked the extent of the land of awful shadow in which lay Thuria. The shadow extended southeast of the coast out into the sea, halfway to a large island, which he said was the seat of Hooja's traitorous government. The island itself lay in the light of the noonday sun. Northwest of the coast, and embracing a part of Thuria, lay the Ledi plains, upon the northwestern verge of which was situated the Mahar city, which took such heavy toll of the Thurians. Thus were the unhappy people now between 2 fires, with Hooja upon one side and the Mahars upon the other. I did not wonder that they sent out an appeal for succor. Though Gak and Kolk both attempted to dissuade me, I was determined to set out at once, nor did I delay longer than to make a copy of my map to be given to Perry, that he might add to his that which I had set down since we parted. I left a letter for him as well, in which, among other things, I advanced the theory that the Sojar-Az, or Great Sea, which Kolk mentioned as stretching eastward from Thuria, might indeed be the same mighty ocean as that which, swinging around the southern end of a continent, ran northward along the shore opposite Phutra, mingling its waters with the huge gulf upon which lay Sari, Amoz, and Greenwich. Against this possibility, I urged him to hasten the building of a fleet of small sailing vessels, which we might utilize should I find it impossible to Hooja's horde to the mainland. I told Gak what I had written, and suggested that as soon as he could, he should make new treaties with the various kingdoms of the empire, collect an army, and march toward Thuria, this, of course, against the possibility of my detention through some cause or other. Kolk gave me a sign to his father, a liddy, or beast of burden, crudely scratched upon a bit of bone, and beneath the liddy a man and a flower, all very rudely done perhaps, but none the less effective, as I well knew from my long years among the primitive men of Pellucidar. The liddy is the tribal beast of the Thurians. The man and the flower, in the combination in which they appeared, bore a double significance, as they constituted not only a message to the effect that the bearer came in peace, but were also Kolk's signature. And so, armed with my credentials and my small arsenal, I set out alone upon my quest for the dearest girl in this world or yours. Kolk gave me explicit directions, though with my map I do not believe that I could have gone wrong. As a matter of fact, I did not need the map at all, since the principal landmark of the first half of my journey, a gigantic mountain peak, was plainly visible from Sari, though a good 100 miles away. At the southern base of this mountain a river rose and ran in a westerly direction, finally turning south and emptying into the Sojaraz some 40 miles northeast of Thuria. All that I had to do was follow this river to the sea and then follow the coast to Thuria. "240 miles of wild mountain and primeval jungle, of untracked plain, of nameless rivers, of deadly swamps and savage forests lay ahead of me, yet never had I been more eager for an adventure than now, for never had more depended upon haste and success. I do not know how long a time that journey required, and only half did I appreciate the varied wonders that each new march unfolded before me. For my mind and heart were filled with but a single image, that of a perfect girl whose great dark eyes looked bravely forth from a frame of raven hair. It was not until I had passed the high peak and found the river that my eyes first discovered the pendant world, the tiny satellite which hangs low over the surface of Pellucidar, casting its perpetual shadow always upon the same spot, the area that is known here as the Land of Awful Shadow, in which dwells the tribe of Thuria. From the distance and the elevation of the highlands where I stood, the Pellucidarian noonday moon showed half in sunshine and half in shadow, while directly beneath it was plainly visible the round dark spot upon the surface of Pellucidar where the sun has never shone. From where I stood, the moon appeared to hang so low above the ground as almost to touch it. But later I was to learn that it floats a mile above the surface, which seems indeed quite close for a moon. Following the river downward, I soon lost sight of the tiny planet as I entered the mazes of a lofty forest. Nor did I catch another glimpse of it for some time, several marches at least. However, when the river led me to the sea, or rather just before it reached the sea, of a sudden the sky became overcast, and the size and luxuriance of the vegetation diminished as by magic, as if an omnipotent hand had drawn a line upon the earth and said, "Upon this side shall the trees and the shrubs, the grasses and the flowers riot in profusion of rich colours, gigantic size and bewildering abundance, and upon that side shall they be dwarfed and pale and scant." Instantly I looked above, for clouds are so uncommon in the skies of Pellucidar. They are practically unknown except above the mightiest mountain ranges, that it had given me something of a start to discover the sun obliterated. But I was not long in coming to a realization of the cause of the shadow. Above me hung another world. I could see its mountains and valleys, oceans, lakes and rivers, its broad grassy plains and dense forests. But too great was the distance, and too deep the shadow of its underside, for me to distinguish any movement as of animal life. Instantly a great curiosity was awakened within me. The questions which the sight of this planet, so tantalizingly close, raised in my mind were numerous and unanswerable. Was it inhabited? If so, by what manner and form of creature? Were its people as relatively diminutive as their little world, or were they as disproportionately huge as the lesser attraction of gravity upon the surface of their globe would permit of their being? As I watched it, I saw that it was revolving upon an axis that lay parallel to the surface of Pellucidar, so that during each revolution its entire surface was once exposed to the world below and once bathed in the heat of the great sun above. The little world had that which Pellucidar could not have, a day and night, and greatest of boons to one outer earthly born, time. Here I saw a chance to give time to Pellucidar, using this mighty clock, revolving perpetually in the heavens, to record the passage of the hours for the earth below. Here should be located an observatory, from which might be flashed by wireless to every corner of the empire the correct time once each day. That this time would be easily measured I had no doubt, since so plain were the landmarks upon the undersurface of the satellite that it would be but necessary to erect a simple instrument and mark the instant of passage of a given landmark across the instrument. But then was not the time for dreaming. I must devote my mind to the purpose of my journey, so I hastened onward beneath the great shadow. As I advanced, I could not but note the changing nature of the vegetation and the paling of its hues. The river led me a short distance within the shadow before it emptied into the Sojaraz. Then I continued in a southerly direction along the coast toward the village of Thuria, where I hoped to find Gork and deliver to him my credentials. I had progressed no great distance from the mouth of the river when I discerned, lying some distance at sea, a great island. This I assumed to be the stronghold of Hooja, nor did I doubt that upon it even now was Dian. The way was most difficult, since shortly after leaving the river I encountered lofty cliffs split by numerous long, narrow fjords, each of which necessitated a considerable detour. As the crow flies, it is about 20 miles from the mouth of the river to Thuria, but before I had covered half of it, I was fagged. There was no familiar fruit or vegetable growing upon the rocky soil of the cliff tops, and I would have fared ill for food had not a hare broken cover almost beneath my nose. I carried bow and arrows to conserve my ammunition supply, but so quick was the little animal that I had no time to draw and fit a shaft. In fact, my dinner was 100 yards away, going like the proverbial bat when I dropped my 6-shooter on it. It was a pretty shot, and when coupled with a good dinner, made me quite contented with myself. After eating, I lay down and slept. When I awoke, I was scarcely so self-satisfied, for I had not more than opened my eyes before I became aware of the presence, barely 100 yards from me, of a pack of some 20 huge wolf-dogs, the things which Perry insisted upon calling hyenodons, and almost simultaneously I discovered that while I slept my revolvers, rifle, bow, arrows, and knife had been stolen from me, and the wolf-dog pack was preparing to rush me. Chapter 7. From Plight to Plight. I have never been much of a runner. I hate running. But if ever a sprinter broke into smithereens all world's records, it was I that day when I fled before those hideous beasts along the narrow spit of rocky cliff between 2 narrow fjords toward the Sojaraz. Just as I reached the verge of the cliff, the foremost of the brutes was upon me. He leaped and closed his massive jaws upon my shoulder. The momentum of his flying body, added to that of my own, carried the 2 of us over the cliff. It was a hideous fall. The cliff was almost perpendicular. At its foot broke the sea against a solid wall of rock. We struck the cliff face once in our descent, and then plunged into the salt sea. With the impact with the water, the hyenodon released his hold upon my shoulder. As I came sputtering to the surface, I looked about for some tiny foot or handhold where I might cling for a moment of rest and recuperation. The cliff itself offered me nothing, so I swam toward the mouth of the fjord. At the far end, I could see that erosion from above had washed down sufficient rubble to form a narrow ribbon of beach. Toward this I swam with all my strength. Not once did I look behind me, since every unnecessary movement in swimming detracts so much from one's endurance and speed. Not until I had drawn myself safely out upon the beach did I turn my eyes back toward the sea for the hyenodon. He was swimming slowly and apparently painfully toward the beach upon which I stood. I watched him for a long time, wondering why it was that such a dog-like animal was not a better swimmer. As he neared me, I realized that he was weakening rapidly. I had gathered a handful of stones to be ready for his assault when he landed, but in a moment I let them fall from my hands. It was evident that the brute either was no swimmer or else was severely injured, for by now he was making practically no headway. Indeed, it was with quite apparent difficulty that he kept his nose above the surface of the sea. He was not more than 50 yards from shore when he went under. I watched the spot where he had disappeared, and in a moment I saw his head reappear. The look of dumb misery in his eyes struck a chord in my breast, for I love dogs. I forgot that he was a vicious primordial wolf thing, a man-eater, a scourge, and a terror. I saw only the sad eyes that looked like the eyes of Raja, my dead collie of the outer world. I did not stop to weigh and consider. In other words, I did not stop to think, which I believe must be the way of men who do things, in contradistinction to those who think much and do nothing. Instead, I leaped back into the water and swam out toward the drowning beast. At first he showed his teeth at my approach, but just before I reached him, he went under for the second time, so that I had to dive to get him. I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, and though he weighed as much as a Shetland pony, I managed to drag him to shore and well up upon the beach. Here I found that one of his forelegs was broken. The crash against the cliff face must have done it. By this time all the fight was out of him, so that when I had gathered a few tiny branches from some of the stunted trees that grew in the crevices of the cliff and returned to him, he permitted me to set his broken leg and bind it in splints. I had to tear part of my shirt into bits to obtain a bandage, but at last the job was done. Then I sat stroking the savage head and talking to the beast in the man-dog talk with which you are familiar if you ever owned and loved a dog. When he is well, I thought, he probably will turn upon me and attempt to devour me, and against that eventuality I gathered together a pile of rocks and set to work to fashion a stone knife. We were bottled up at the head of the fjord as completely as if we'd been behind prison bars. Before us spread the Sojar Az, and elsewhere about us rose unscalable cliffs. Fortunately, a little rivulet trickled down the side of the rocky wall, giving us ample supply of fresh water, some of which I kept constantly beside the hyenodon in a huge bowl-shaped shell, of which there were countless numbers among the rubble of the beach. For food we subsisted upon shellfish and an occasional bird that I succeeded in knocking over with a rock, for long practice as a pitcher on prep school and varsity nines had made me an excellent shot with a hand-thrown missile. It was not long before the hyenodon's leg was sufficiently mended to permit him to rise and hobble about on 3 legs. I shall never forget with what intent interest I watched his first attempt. Close at my hand lay my pile of rocks. Slowly the beast came to his 3 good feet. He stretched himself, lowered his head, and lapped water from the drinking shell at his side, turned and looked at me, and then limped off toward the cliffs. Thrice he traversed the entire extent of our prison, seeking, I imagine, a loophole for escape, but finding none, he returned in my direction. Slowly he came quite close to me, sniffed at my shoes, my puttees, my hands, and then limped off a few feet and lay down again. Now that he was able to get around, I was a little uncertain as to the wisdom of my impulsive mercy. How could I sleep with that ferocious thing prowling about the narrow confines of our prison? Should I close my eyes, it might be, to open them again to the feel of the mighty jaws at my throat. To say the least, I was uncomfortable. I have had too much experience with dumb animals to bank very strongly on any sense of gratitude which may be attributed to them by inexperienced sentimentalists. I believe that some animals love their masters, but I doubt very much if their affection is the outcome of gratitude, a characteristic that is so rare as to be only occasionally traceable in the seemingly unselfish acts of man himself. But finally I was forced to sleep. Tired nature would be put off no longer. I simply fell asleep, willy-nilly, as I sat looking out to sea. I had been very uncomfortable since my ducking in the ocean, for though I could see the sunlight on the water halfway toward the island and upon the island itself, no ray of it fell upon us. We were well within the land of awful shadow. A perpetual half-warmth pervaded the atmosphere, but clothing was slow in drying, and so from loss of sleep and great physical discomfort, I at last gave way to nature's demands and sank into profound slumber. When I awoke, it was with a start, for a heavy body was upon me. My first thought was that the hyenodon had at last attacked me, but as my eyes opened and I struggled to rise, I saw that a man was astride me and 3 others bending close above him. I am no weakling, and never have been. My experience in the hard life of the inner world has turned my thews to steel. Even such giants as Gak the Hairy One have praised my strength, but to it is added another quality which they lack: science. The man upon me held me down awkwardly, leaving me many openings, one of which I was not slow in taking advantage of, so that almost before the fellow knew that I was awake, I was upon my feet with my arms over his shoulders and about his waist, and had hurled him heavily over my head to the hard rubble of the beach, where he lay quite still. In the instant that I arose, I had seen the hyaenodon lying asleep beside a boulder a few yards away. So nearly was he the colour of the rock that he was scarcely discernible. Evidently the newcomers had not seen him. I had not more than freed myself from one of my antagonists before the other three were upon me. They did not work silently now, but charged me with savage cries, a mistake upon their part. The fact that they did not draw their weapons against me convinced me that they desired to take me alive, but I fought as desperately as if death loomed immediate and sure. The battle was short, for scarce had their first wild whoop reverberated through the rocky fjord, and they had closed upon me, than a hairy mass of demoniacal rage hurtled among us. It was the hyaenodon. In an instant he had pulled down one of the men, and with a single shake, terrier-like, had broken his neck. Then he was upon another. In their efforts to vanquish the wolf-dog, the savages forgot all about me, thus giving me an instant in which to snatch a knife from the loin-string of him who had first fallen and account for another of them. Almost simultaneously the hyaenodon pulled down the remaining enemy, crushing his skull with a single bite of those fearsome jaws. The battle was over, unless the beast considered me fair prey too. I waited, ready for him with knife and bludgeon, also filched from a dead foeman, but he paid no attention to me, falling to work instead to devour one of the corpses. The beast had been handicapped but little by his splintered leg, but having eaten, he lay down and commenced to gnaw at the bandage. I was sitting some little distance away devouring shellfish, of which, by the way, I was becoming exceedingly tired. Presently the hyaenodon arose and came toward me. I did not move. He stopped in front of me and deliberately raised his bandaged leg and pawed my knee. His act was as intelligible as words. He wished the bandage removed. I took the great paw in one hand, and with the other hand untied and unwound the bandage, removed the splints, and felt of the injured member. As far as I could judge, the bone was completely knit. The joint was stiff. When I bent it a little, the brute winced, but he neither growled nor tried to pull away. Very slowly and gently I rubbed the joint and applied pressure to it for a few moments. Then I set it down upon the ground. The hyaenodon walked around me a few times and then lay down at my side, his body touching mine. I laid my hand upon his head. He did not move. Slowly I scratched about his ears and neck and down beneath the fierce jaws. The only sign he gave was to raise his chin a trifle, that I might better caress him. That was enough! From that moment I have never again felt suspicion of Rajah, as I immediately named him. Somehow all sense of loneliness vanished too. I had a dog. I had never guessed precisely what it was that was lacking to life in Pellucidar, but now I knew it was the total absence of domestic animals. Man here had not yet reached the point where he might take the time from slaughter and escaping slaughter to make friends with any of the brute creation. I must qualify this statement a trifle and say that this was true of those tribes with which I was most familiar. The Thurians do domesticate the colossal Lidi, traversing the great Lidi plains upon the backs of these grotesque and stupendous monsters, and possibly there may also be other far distant peoples within the great world who have tamed others of the wild things of jungle, plain, or mountain. The Thurians practice agriculture in a crude sort of way. It is my opinion that this is one of the earliest steps from savagery to civilization. The taming of wild beasts and their domestication follows. Perry argues that wild dogs were first domesticated for hunting purposes, but I do not agree with him. I believe that if their domestication were not purely the result of an accident, as for example my taming of the hyenodon, it came about through the desire of tribes who had previously domesticated flocks and herds to have some strong ferocious beast to guard their roaming property. However, I lean rather more strongly to the theory of accident. As I sat there upon the beach of the little fire eating my unpalatable shellfish, I commenced to wonder how it had been that the 4 savages had been able to reach me, though I had been unable to escape from my natural prison. I glanced about in all directions, searching for an explanation. At last my eyes fell upon the bow of a small dugout protruding scarce a foot from behind a large boulder lying half in the water at the edge of the beach. At my discovery I leaped to my feet so suddenly that it brought Rajah, growling and bristling, upon all 4s in an instant. For the moment I had forgotten him, but his savage rumbling did not cause me any uneasiness. He glanced quickly about in all directions as if searching for the cause of my excitement. Then, as I walked rapidly down toward the dugout, he slunk silently after me. The dugout was similar in many respects to those which I had seen in use by the Mesops. In it were 4 paddles. I was much delighted, as it promptly offered me the escape I had been craving. I pushed it out into water that would float it, stepped in, and called to Rajah to enter. At first he did not seem to understand what I wished of him, but after I had paddled out a few yards, he plunged through the surf and swam after me. When he had come alongside, I grasped the scruff of his neck, and after a considerable struggle, in which I several times came near to overturning the canoe, I managed to drag him aboard, where he shook himself vigorously and squatted down before me. After emerging from the ford, I paddled southward along the coast, where presently the lofty cliffs gave way to lower and more level country. It was here somewhere that I should come upon the principal village of the Thurians. When, after a time, I saw in the distance what I took to be huts in a clearing near the shore, I drew quickly into land, for though I had been furnished credentials by Kolk, I was not sufficiently familiar with the tribal characteristics of these people to know whether I should receive a friendly welcome or not. And in case I should not, I wanted to be sure of having a canoe hidden safely away, so that I might undertake the trip to the island, in any event, provided, of course, that I escaped the Thurians should they prove belligerent. At the point where I landed, the shore was quite low. A forest of pale, scrubby ferns ran down almost to the beach. Here I dragged up the dugout, hiding it well within the vegetation, and with some loose rocks built a cairn upon the beach to mark my cache. Then I turned my steps toward the Thurian village. As I proceeded, I began to speculate upon the possible actions of Rajah when we should enter the presence of other men than myself. The brute was padding softly at my side, his sensitive nose, constant twitch, and his fierce eyes moving restlessly from side to side. Nothing would ever take Rajah unawares. The more I thought upon the matter, the greater became my perturbation. I did not want Rajah to attack any of the people upon whose friendship I so greatly depended, nor did I want him injured or slain by them. I wondered if Rajah would stand for a leash. His head, as he paced beside me, was level with my hip. I laid my hand upon it caressingly. As I did so, he turned and looked up into my face, his jaws parting and his red tongue lolling, as you have seen your own dogs beneath a love-pat. "Just been waiting all your life to be tamed and loved, haven't you, old man?" I asked. "You're nothing but a good pup, and the man who put the hyeno in your name ought to be sued for libel." Rajah bared his mighty fangs with upcurled, snarling lips and licked my hand. "You're grinning, you old fraud, you!" I cried. "If you're not, I'll eat you. I'll bet a doughnut you're nothing but some kid's poor old Fido, masquerading around as a real live man-eater." Rajah whined, and so we walked on together toward Thuria, I talking to the beast at my side, and he seeming to enjoy my company no less than I enjoyed his. If you don't think it's lonesome wandering all by yourself through savage, unknown Pellucidar, why, just try it, and you will not wonder that I was glad of the company of this first dog. this living replica of the fierce and now extinct hyenodon of the outer crust that hunted in savage packs the great elk across the snows of southern France, in the days when the mastodon roamed at will over the broad continent of which the British Isles were then a part, and perchance left his footprints and his bones in the sands of Atlantis as well. Thus I dreamed as we moved on toward Thuria. My dreaming was rudely shattered by a savage growl from Raja. I looked down at him. He had stopped in his tracks as one turned to stone. A thin ridge of stiff hair bristled along the entire length of his spine. His yellow-green eyes were fastened upon the scrubby jungle at our right. I fastened my fingers in the bristles at his neck and turned my eyes in the direction that his pointed. At first I saw nothing. Then a slight movement of the bushes riveted my attention. I thought it must be some wild beast, and was glad of the primitive weapons I had taken from the bodies of the warriors who had attacked me. Presently I distinguished two eyes peering at us from the vegetation. I took a step in their direction, and as I did so a youth arose and fled precipitately in the direction we had been going. Raja struggled to be after him, but I held tightly to his neck, an act which he did not seem to relish, for he turned on me with bared fangs. I determined that now was as good a time as any to discover just how deep was Raja's affection for me. One of us could be master, and logically I was the one. He growled at me. I cuffed him sharply across the nose. He looked at me for a moment in surprised bewilderment, and then he growled again. I made another feint at him, expecting that it would bring him at my throat, but instead he winced and crouched down. Raja was subdued. I stooped and patted him. Then I took a piece of the rope that constituted a part of my equipment and made a leash for him. Thus we resumed our journey toward Thuria. The youth who had seen us was evidently of the Thurians. That he had lost no time in racing homeward and spreading the word of my coming was evidenced when we had come within sight of the clearing and the village, the first real village, by the way, that I had ever seen constructed by human Pellucidarians. There was a rude rectangle walled with logs and boulders in which were 100 or more thatched huts of similar construction. There was no gate. Ladders that could be removed by night led over the palisade. Before the village were assembled a great concourse of warriors. Inside I could see the heads of women and children peering over the top of the wall, and also farther back the long necks of Lidi, topped by their tiny heads. Lidi, by the way, is both the singular and plural form of the noun that describes the huge beasts of burden of the Thurians. They are enormous quadrupeds, 80 or 100 feet long, with very small heads perched at the top of very long, slender necks. Their heads are quite 40 feet from the ground. Their gait is slow and deliberate, but so enormous are their strides that, as a matter of fact, they cover the ground quite rapidly. Perry has told me that they are almost identical with the fossilized remains of the Diplodocus of the outer crust's Jurassic age. I have to take his word for it, and I guess you will, unless you know more of such matters than I. As we came in sight of the warriors, the men set up a great jabbering. Their eyes were wide in astonishment, not only, I presume, because of my strange garmenture, but as well from the fact that I came in company with a Jalok, which is the Pellucidarian name of the hyenodon. Raja tugged at his leash, growling and showing his long white fangs. He would have liked nothing better than to be at the throats of the whole aggregation. But I held him in with the leash, though it took all my strength to do it. My free hand I held above my head, palm out, in token of the peacefulness of my mission. In the foreground I saw the youth who had discovered us, and I could tell from the way he carried himself that he was quite overcome by his own importance. The warriors about him were all fine-looking fellows, though shorter and squatter than the Sarians or the Amazighites. Their colour, too, was a bit lighter, owing, no doubt, to the fact that much of their lives is spent within the shadow of the world that hangs forever above their country. A little in advance of the others was a bearded fellow tricked out in many ornaments. I didn't need to ask to know that he was the chieftain, doubtless Gork, father of Kolk. Now to him I addressed myself. "I am David," I said, "Emperor of the Federated Kingdoms of Pellucidar. Doubtless you have heard of me?" He nodded his head affirmatively. "I come from Sari," I continued, "where I just met Kolk, the son of Gork. I bear a token from Kolk to his father, which will prove that I am a friend." Again the warrior nodded. "I am Gork," he said. "Where is the token?" "Here," I replied, and fished into the game bag where I had placed it. Gork and his people waited in silence. My hand searched the inside of the bag. It was empty. The token had been stolen with my arms. Chapter 8. I Captive. When Gork and his people saw that I had no token, they commenced to taunt me. "You do not come from Kolk, but from the Sly One," they cried. "He has sent you from the island to spy upon us. Go away, or we will set upon you and kill you." I explained that all my belongings had been stolen from me, and that the robber must have taken the token too, but they didn't believe me. As proof that I was one of Hooja's people, they pointed to my weapons, which they said were ornamented like those of the island clan. Further, they said that no good man went in company with a Jalok, and that by this line of reasoning I certainly was a bad man. I saw that they were not naturally a warlike tribe, for they preferred that I leave in peace rather than force them to attack me, whereas the Sarians would have killed a suspicious stranger first and inquired into his purposes later. I think Raja sensed their antagonism, for he kept tugging at his leash and growling ominously. They were a bit in awe of him, and kept at a safe distance. It was evident that they could not comprehend why it was that this savage brute did not turn upon me and rend me. I wasted a long time there, trying to persuade Gork to accept me at my own valuation, but he was too canny. The best he would do was to give us food, which he did, and direct me as to the safest portion of the island upon which to attempt a landing, though even as he told me I am sure that he thought my request for information but a blind to deceive him as to my true knowledge of the insular stronghold. At last I turned away from them, rather disheartened, for I had hoped to be able to enlist a considerable force of them in an attempt to rush Hooja's horde and rescue Dian. Back along the beach toward the hidden canoe we made our way. By the time we came to the cairn, I was dog-tired. Throwing myself upon the sand, I soon slept, and with Raja stretched out beside me, I felt a far greater security than I had enjoyed for a long time. I awoke much refreshed to find Raja's eyes glued upon me. The moment I opened mine, he rose, stretched himself, and without a backward glance plunged into the jungle. For several minutes I could hear him crashing through the brush. Then all was silent. I wondered if he had left me to return to his fierce pack. A feeling of loneliness overwhelmed me. With a sigh, I turned to the work of dragging the canoe down to the sea. As I entered the jungle where the dugout lay, a hare darted from beneath the boat's side, and a well-aimed cast of my javelin brought it down. I was hungry, I had not realized it before, so I sat upon the edge of the canoe and devoured my repast. The last remnants gone, I again busied myself with preparations for my expedition to the island. I did not know for certain that Dian was there, but I surmised as much, nor could I guess what obstacles might confront me in an effort to rescue her. For a time I loitered about after I had the canoe at the water's edge, hoping against hope that Raja would return. But he did not, so I shoved the awkward craft through the surf and leaped into it. I was still a little downcast by the desertion of my newfound friend, though I tried to assure myself that it was nothing but what I might have expected. The savage brute had served me well in the short time that we had been together, and had repaid his debt of gratitude to me, since he had saved my life, or at least my liberty. No less certainly than I had saved his life when he was injured and drowning. The trip across the water to the island was uneventful. I was mighty glad to be in the sunshine again when I passed out of the shadow of the dead world about halfway between the mainland and the island. The hot rays of the noonday sun did a great deal toward raising my spirits and dispelling the mental gloom in which I had been shrouded almost continually since entering the land of awful shadow. There is nothing more dispiriting to me than absence of sunshine. I had paddled to the southwestern point, which Gork said he believed to be the least frequented portion of the island, as he had never seen boats put off from there. I found a shallow reef running far out into the sea, and rather precipitous cliffs running almost to the surf. It was a nasty place to land, and I realized now why it was not used by the natives, but at last I managed, after a good wetting, to beach my canoe and scale the cliffs. The country beyond them appeared more open and park-like than I had anticipated, since from the mainland the entire coast that is visible seems densely clothed with tropical jungle. This jungle, as I could see from the vantage point of the cliff top, formed but a relatively narrow strip between the sea and the more open forest and meadow of the interior. Farther back there was a range of low but apparently very rocky hills, and here and there all about were visible flat-topped masses of rock, small mountains in fact, which reminded me of pictures I had seen of landscapes in New Mexico. Altogether, the country was very much broken and very beautiful. From where I stood, I counted no less than a dozen streams winding down from among the table buttes and emptying into a pretty river, which flowed away in a northeasterly direction toward the opposite end of the island. As I let my eyes roam over the scene, I suddenly became aware of figures moving upon the flat top of a far distant butte. Whether they were beast or human, though, I could not make out, but at least they were alive, so I determined to prosecute my search for Hooja's stronghold in the general direction of this butte. To descend to the valley required no great effort. As I swung along through the lush grass and the fragrant flowers, my cudgel swinging in my hand and my javelin looped across my shoulders with its aurochs hide strap, I felt equal to any emergency, ready for any danger. I had covered quite a little distance, and I was passing through a strip of wood which lay at the foot of one of the flat-topped hills, when I became conscious of the sensation of being watched. My life within Pellucidar has rather quickened my senses of sight, hearing, and smell, and, too, certain primitive, intuitive, or instinctive qualities that seem blunted in civilized man. But though I was positive that eyes were upon me, I could see no sign of any living thing within the wood other than the many gay-plumaged birds and little monkeys which filled the trees with life, color, and action. To you it may seem that my conviction was the result of an overwrought imagination, or to the actual reality of the prying eyes of the little monkeys or the curious ones of the birds, but there is a difference which I cannot explain between the sensation of casual observation and studied espionage. A sheep might gaze at you without transmitting a warning through your subjective mind, because you are in no danger from a sheep. But let a tiger gaze fixedly at you from ambush, and unless your primitive instincts are completely calloused, you will presently commence to glance furtively about and be filled with vague, unreasoning terror. Thus was it with me then. I grasped my cudgel more firmly and unslung my javelin, carrying it in my left hand. I peered to left and right, but I saw nothing. Then, all quite suddenly, there fell about my neck and shoulders, around my arms and body, a number of pliant fibre ropes. In a jiffy I was trussed up as neatly as you might wish. One of the nooses dropped to my ankles and was jerked up with a suddenness that brought me to my face upon the ground. Then something heavy and hairy sprang upon my back. I fought to draw my knife, but hairy hands grasped my wrists and, dragging them behind my back, bound them securely. Next, my feet were bound. Then I was turned over upon my back to look up into the faces of my captors. And what faces! Imagine, if you can, a cross between a sheep and a gorilla, and you will have some conception of the physiognomy of the creature that bent close above me and of those of the half-dozen others that clustered about. There was the facial length and great eyes of the sheep, and the bull neck and hideous fangs of the gorilla. The bodies and limbs were both man and gorilla-like. As they bent over me, they conversed in a monosyllabic tongue that was perfectly intelligible to me. It was something of a simplified language that had no need for aught but nouns and verbs, but such words as it included were the same as those of the human beings of Pellucidar. It was amplified by many gestures which filled in the speech gaps. I asked them what they intended doing with me, but, like our own North American Indians when questioned by a white man, they pretended not to understand me. One of them swung me to his shoulder as lightly as if I had been a shoat. He was a huge creature, as were his fellows, standing fully 7 feet upon his short legs, and weighing considerably more than 1/4 of a ton. 2 went ahead of my bearer, and 3 behind. In this order we cut to the right through the forest to the foot of the hill, where precipitous cliffs appeared to bar our farther progress in this direction. But my escort never paused. Like ants upon a wall, they scaled that seemingly unscalable barrier, clinging, heaven knows how, to its ragged perpendicular face. During most of the short journey to the summit, I must admit that my hair stood on end. Presently, however, we topped the thing and stood upon the level mesa which crowned it. Immediately from all about, out of burrows and rough rocky lairs, poured a perfect torrent of beasts similar to my captors. They clustered about, jabbering at my guards and attempting to get their hands upon me. Whether from curiosity or a desire to do me bodily harm, I did not know, since my escort with bared fangs and heavy blows kept them off. Across the mesa we went, to stop at last before a large pile of rocks in which an opening appeared. Here my guards set me upon my feet and called out a word which sounded like "Grr-gah!" and which I later learned was the name of their king. Presently there emerged from the cavernous depths of the lair a monstrous creature, scarred from 100 battles, almost hairless, and with an empty socket where one eye had been. The other eye, sheep-like in its mildness, gave the most startling appearance to the beast, which, but for that single timid orb, was the most fearsome thing that one could imagine. I had encountered the black, hairless, long-tailed ape, things of the mainland, the creatures which Perry thought might constitute the link between the higher orders of apes and man, but these brute men of Gagar seemed to set that theory back to 0, for there was less similarity between the black ape men and these creatures than there was between the latter and man, while both had many human attributes, some of which were better developed in one species and some in the other. The black apes were hairless and built thatched huts in their arboreal retreats. They kept domesticated dogs and ruminants, in which respect they were farther advanced than the human beings of Pellucidar, but they appeared to have only a meagre language and sported long, ape-like tails. On the other hand, Gargar's people were, for the most part, quite hairy, but they were tailless and had a language similar to that of the human race of Pellucidar, nor were they arboreal. Their skins, where skin showed, were white. From the foregoing facts and others that I have noted during my long life within Pellucidar, which is now passing through an age analogous to some pre-glacial age of the outer crust, I am constrained to the belief that evolution is not so much a gradual transition from one form to another as it is an accident of breeding, either by crossing or the hazards of birth. In other words, it is my belief that the first man was a freak of nature, nor would one have to draw over-strongly upon his credulity to be convinced that Gr and his tribe were also freaks. The great man-brute seated himself upon a flat rock, his throne, I imagine, just before the entrance to his lair. With elbows on knees and chin in palms, he regarded me intently through his lone sheep-eye, while one of my captors told of my taking. When all had been related, Gaw questioned me. I shall not attempt to quote these people in their own abbreviated tongue. You would have even greater difficulty in interpreting them than did I. Instead, I shall put the words into their mouths which will carry to you the ideas which they intended to convey. You are an enemy, was Gurgaga's initial declaration. You belong to the tribe of Hooja. Ah, so they knew Hooja and he was their enemy. Good. I am an enemy of Hooja, I replied. He has stolen my mate, and I have come here to take her away from him and punish Hooja. How could you do that alone? I do not know, I answered, but I should have tried had you not captured me. What do you intend to do with me? You shall work for us. You will not kill me, I asked. We do not kill except in self-defense, he replied. Self-defense and punishment. Those who would kill us and those who do wrong. If we knew you were one of Hooja's people, we might kill you, for all Hooja's people are bad people. But you say you are an enemy of Hooja. You may not speak the truth, but until we learn that you have lied, we shall not kill you. You shall work. If you hate Hooja, I suggested, why not let me, who hate him too, go and punish him? For some time Gruger sat in thought. Then he raised his head and addressed my guard. "Take him to his work," he ordered. His tone was final. As if to emphasize it, he turned and entered his burrow. My guard conducted me farther into the mesa, where we came presently to a tiny depression or valley, at one end of which gushed a warm spring. The view that opened before me was the most surprising that I have ever seen. In the hollow, which must have covered several hundred acres, were numerous fields of growing things, and working all about with crude implements or with no implements at all, other than their bare hands, were many of the brute men engaged in the first agriculture that I had seen within Pellucidar. They put me to work cultivating in a patch of melons. I never was a farmer, nor particularly keen for this sort of work, and I am free to confess that time never had dragged so heavily as it did during the hour or the year I spent there at that work. How long it really was I do not know, of course, but it was all too long. The creatures that worked about me were quite simple and friendly. One of them proved to be a son of Gorgiagja. He had broken some minor tribal law and was working out his sentence in the fields. He told me that his tribe had lived upon this hilltop always, and that there were other tribes like them dwelling upon other hilltops. They had no wars and had always lived in peace and harmony, menaced only by the larger carnivora of the island, until my kind had come under a creature called Huja, and attacked and killed them when they chanced to descend from their natural fortresses to visit their fellows upon other lofty mesas. Now they were afraid, but some day they would go in a body and fall upon Huja and his people and slay them all. I explained to him that I was Huja's enemy, and asked, when they were ready to go, that I be allowed to go with them, or, better still, that they let me go ahead and learn all that I could about the village where Huja dwelt, so that they might attack it with the best chance of success. Grogror's son seemed much impressed by my suggestion. He said that when he was through in the fields, he would speak to his father about the matter. Some time after this, Grogror came through the fields where we were, and his son spoke to him upon the subject, but the old gentleman was evidently in anything but a good humour, for he cuffed the youngster and, turning upon me, informed me that he was convinced that I had lied to him, that I was one of Huja's people. Wherefore, he concluded, we shall slay you as soon as the melons are cultivated. Hasten, therefore. And hasten I did. I hastened to cultivate the weeds which grew among the melon vines. Where there had been one sickly weed before, I nourished 2 healthy ones. When I found a particularly promising variety of weed growing elsewhere than among my melons, I forthwith dug it up and transplanted it among my charges. My masters did not seem to realize my perfidy. They saw me always laboring diligently in the melon patch, and as time enters not into the reckoning of Pellucidarians, even of human beings, and much less of brutes and half-brutes, I might have lived on indefinitely through this subterfuge had not that occurred which took me out of the melon patch for good and all. Chapter 9. Huja's Cutthroats Appear. I had built a little shelter of rocks and brush where I might crawl in and sleep out of the perpetual light and heat of the noonday sun. When I was tired or hungry, I retired to my humble cot. My masters never interposed the slightest objection. As a matter of fact, they were very good to me. Nor did I see aught while I was among them to indicate that they are ever else than a simple, kindly folk when left to themselves. Their awe-inspiring size, terrific strength, mighty fighting fangs, and hideous appearance are but the attributes necessary to the successful waging of their constant battle for survival, and well do they employ them when the need arises. The only flesh they eat is that of herbivorous animals and birds. When they hunt the mighty thag, the prehistoric boz of the outer crust, a single male, with his fibre rope, will catch and kill the greatest of the bulls. Well, as I was about to say, I had this little shelter at the edge of my melon patch. Here I was resting from my labours on a certain occasion when I heard a great hubbub in the village, which lay about 1/4 of a mile away. Presently a male came racing toward the field, shouting excitedly. As he approached, I came from my shelter to learn what all the commotion might be about, for the monotony of my existence in the melon patch must have fostered that trait of my curiosity from which it had always been my secret boast. I am peculiarly free. The other workers also ran forward to meet the messenger, who quickly unburdened himself of his information, and as quickly turned and scampered back toward the village. When running, these beast-men often go upon all fours. Thus they leap over obstacles that would slow up a human being, and upon the level attain a speed that would make a thoroughbred look to his laurels. The result in this instance was that before I had more than assimilated the gist of the word which had been brought to the fields, I was alone, watching my co-workers speeding villageward. I was alone! It was the first time since my capture that no beast-man had been within sight of me. I was alone, and all my captors were in the village at the opposite edge of the mesa, repelling an attack of Hooja's horde. It seemed from the messenger's tale that 2 of Grgr's great males had been set upon by a half-dozen of Hooja's cutthroats, while the former were peaceably returning from the thag hunt. The 2 had returned to the village unscratched, while but a single one of Hooja's half-dozen had escaped to report the outcome of the battle to their leader. Now Hooja was coming to punish Gurgaga's people. With his large force armed with the bows and arrows that Hooja had learned from me to make, with long lances and sharp knives, I feared that even the mighty strength of the beastmen could avail them but little. At last had come the opportunity for which I waited. I was free to make for the far end of the mesa, find my way to the valley below, and while the 2 forces were engaged in their struggle, continue my search for Hooja's village, which I had learned from the beastmen lay farther on down the river that I had been following when taken prisoner. As I turned to make for the mesa's rim, the sounds of battle came plainly to my ears. The hoarse shouts of men mingled with the half-beastly roars and growls of the brute folk. Did I take advantage of my opportunity? I did not. Instead, lured by the din of strife and by the desire to deliver a stroke, however feeble, against hated Hooja, I wheeled and ran directly toward the village. When I reached the edge of the plateau, such a scene met my astonished gaze as never before had startled it, for the unique battle methods of the half-brutes were rather the most remarkable I had ever witnessed. Along the very edge of the cliff-top stood a thin line of mighty males, the rope-throwers of the tribe. A few feet behind these, the rest of the males, with the exception of about 20, formed a second line. Still farther in the rear, all the women and young children were clustered into a single group under the protection of the remaining 20 fighting males and all the old males. But it was the work of the first 2 lines that interested me. The forces of Hooja, a great horde of savage Sagoths and primeval cavemen, were working their way up the steep cliff face. Their agility, but slightly less than that of my captors, who had clambered so nimbly aloft, even he who was burdened by my weight. As the attackers came on, they paused occasionally, wherever a projection gave them sufficient foothold, and launched arrows and spears at the defenders above them. During the entire battle, both sides hurled taunts and insults at one another, the human beings naturally excelling the brutes in the coarseness and vileness of their vilification and invective. The firing line of the brute men wielded no weapon other than their long fiber nooses. When a foeman came within range of them, a noose would settle unerringly about him, and he would be dragged, fighting and yelling, to the cliff top, unless, as occasionally occurred, he was quick enough to draw his knife and cut the rope above him, in which event he usually plunged downward to a no less certain death than that which awaited him above. Those who were hauled up within reach of the powerful clutches of the defenders had the nooses snatched from them and were catapulted back through the first line to the second, where they were seized and killed by the simple expedient of a single powerful closing of mighty fangs upon the backs of their necks. But the arrows of the invaders were taking a much heavier toll than the nooses of the defenders, and I foresaw that it was but a matter of time before Hooja's forces must conquer unless the brute men changed their tactics, or the cave men tired of the battle. Gur was standing in the center of the first line. All about him were boulders and large fragments of broken rock. I approached him, and without a word, toppled a large mass of rock over the edge of the cliff. It fell directly upon the head of an archer, crushing him to instant death, and carrying his mangled corpse with it to the bottom of the declivity, and on its way brushing 3 more of the attackers into the hereafter. Gaw turned toward me in surprise. For an instant he appeared to doubt the sincerity of my motives. I felt that perhaps my time had come when he reached for me with one of his giant paws, but I dodged him, and running a few paces to the right, hurled down another missile. It, too, did its allotted work of destruction. Then I picked up smaller fragments, and with all the control and accuracy for which I had earned justly deserved fame in my collegiate days, I rained down a hail of death upon those beneath me. Giar was coming toward me again. I pointed to the litter of rubble upon the cliff-top. "Hurl these down upon the enemy!" I cried to him. "Tell your warriors to throw rocks down upon them." At my words, the others of the first line, who had been interested spectators of my tactics, seized upon great boulders or bits of rock, whichever came first to their hands, and without waiting for a command from Gar, deluged the terrified cavemen with a perfect avalanche of stone. In less than no time, the cliff face was stripped of enemies, and the village of Gurgur was saved. Gurgur was standing beside me when the last of the cavemen disappeared in rapid flight down the valley. He was looking at me intently. "Those were your people," he said. "Why did you kill them?" "They were not my people," I returned. "I have told you that before, but you would not believe me. Will you believe me now when I tell you that I hate Hooja and his tribe as much as you do? Will you believe me when I tell you that I wish to be the friend of Lechuguilla?" For some time he stood there beside me, scratching his head. Evidently it was no less difficult for him to readjust his preconceived conclusions than it is for most human beings, but finally the idea percolated, which it might never have done had he been a man, or I might qualify that statement by saying had he been some men. Finally he spoke. "Gilak," he said, "you have made Lechuguilla ashamed. He would have killed you. How can he reward you?" "Set me free," I replied quickly. "You are free," he said. "You may go down when you wish, or you may stay with us. If you go, you may always return. We are your friends." Naturally, I elected to go. I explained all over again to Gurgur the nature of my mission. He listened attentively. After I had done, he offered to send some of his people with me to guide me to Hooja's village. I was not slow in accepting his offer. First, however, we must eat. The hunters, upon whom Hooja's men had fallen, had brought back the meat of a great thag. There would be a feast to commemorate the victory, a feast and dancing. I had never witnessed a tribal function of the brute folk, though I had often heard strange sounds coming from the village where I had not been allowed since my capture. Now I took part in one of their orgies. It will live forever in my memory. The combination of bestiality and humanity was oftentimes pathetic, and again grotesque or horrible. Beneath the glaring noonday sun, in the sweltering heat of the mesa top, the huge hairy creatures leaped in a great circle. They coiled and threw their fiber ropes. They hurled taunts and insults at an imaginary foe. They fell upon the carcass of the thag and literally tore it to pieces. And they ceased only when, gorged, they could no longer move. I had to wait until the processes of digestion had released my escort from its torpor. Some had eaten until their abdomens were so distended that I thought they must burst, for beside the thag there had been fully 100 antelopes of various sizes and varied degrees of decomposition, which they had unearthed from burial beneath the floors of their lairs to grace the banquet board. But at last we were started. 6 great males and myself. Lechuguilla had returned my weapons to me, and at last I was once more upon my oft-interrupted way toward my goal. Whether I should find Diane at the end of my journey or no, I could not even surmise, but I was none the less impatient to be off, for if only the worst lay in store for me, I wished to know even the worst at once. I could scarce believe that my proud mate would still be alive in the power of Hooja. But time upon Pellucidar is so strange a thing that I realize that to her or to him only a few minutes might have elapsed, since his subtle trickery had enabled him to steal her away from Phutra. Or she might have found the means either to repel his advances or escape him. As we descended the cliff, we disturbed a pack of large hyena-like beasts, Hyena spelaeus, Perry calls them, who were busy among the corpses of the cavemen fallen in battle. The ugly creatures were far from the cowardly things that our own hyenas are reputed to be. They stood their ground with bared fangs as we approached them. But, as I was later to learn, so formidable are the brute folk that there are few even of the larger carnivora that will not make way for them when they go abroad. So the hyenas moved a little from our line of march, closing in again upon their feasts when we had passed. We made our way steadily down the rim of the beautiful river which flows the length of the island, coming at last to a wood rather denser than any that I had before encountered in this country. Well within this forest my escort halted. "There," they said, and pointed ahead. "We are to go no farther." Thus, having guided me to my destination, they left me. Ahead of me, through the trees, I could see what appeared to be the foot of a steep hill. Toward this I made my way. The forest ran to the very base of a cliff, in the face of which were the mouths of many caves. They appeared untenanted, but I decided to watch for a while before venturing farther. A large tree, densely foliaged, offered a splendid vantage point from which to spy upon the cliff, so I clambered among its branches where, securely hidden, I could watch what transpired about the caves. It seemed that I had scarcely settled myself in a comfortable position before a party of cave men emerged from one of the smaller apertures in the cliff face, about 50 feet from the base. They descended into the forest and disappeared. Soon after came several others from the same cave, and after them, at a short interval, a score of women and children who came into the wood to gather fruit. There were several warriors with them, a guard, I presume. After this came other parties, and 2 or 3 groups who passed out of the forest and up the cliff face to enter the same cave. I could not understand it. All who came out had emerged from the same cave. All who returned re-entered it. No other cave gave evidence of habitation, and no cave but one of extraordinary size could have accommodated all the people whom I had seen pass in and out of its mouth. For a long time I sat and watched the coming and going of great numbers of the cave folk. Not once did one leave the cliff by any other opening save that from which I had seen the first party come, nor did any re-enter the cliff through another aperture. What a cave it must be, I thought, that houses an entire tribe. But dissatisfied of the truth of my surmise, I climbed higher among the branches of the tree that I might get a better view of other portions of the cliff. High above the ground, I reached a point whence I could see the summit of the hill. Evidently it was a flat-topped butte, similar to that on which dwelt the tribe of Gurgar. As I sat gazing at it, a figure appeared at the very edge. It was that of a young girl in whose hair was a gorgeous bloom plucked from some flowering tree of the forest. I had seen her pass beneath me but a short while before and enter the small cave that had swallowed all of the returning tribesmen. The mystery was solved. The cave was but the mouth of a passage that led upward through the cliff to the summit of the hill. It served merely as an avenue from their lofty citadel to the valley below. No sooner had the truth flashed upon me than the realization came that I must seek some other means of reaching the village, for to pass unobserved through this well-traveled thoroughfare would be impossible. At the moment, there was no one in sight below me, so I slid quickly from my arboreal watchtower to the ground and moved rapidly away to the right with the intention of circling the hill, if necessary, until I had found an unwatched spot where I might have some slight chance of scaling the heights and reaching the top unseen. I kept close to the edge of the forest, in the very midst of which the hill seemed to rise. Though I carefully scanned the cliff as I traversed its base, I saw no sign of any other entrance than that to which my guides had led me. After some little time, the roar of the sea broke upon my ears. Shortly after, I came upon the broad ocean which breaks at this point the very foot of the great hill where Hooja had found safe refuge for himself and his villains. I was just about to clamber along the jagged rocks which lie at the base of the cliff next to the sea, in search of some foothold to the top, when I chanced to see a canoe rounding the end of the island. I threw myself down behind a large boulder where I could watch the dugout and its occupants without myself being seen. They paddled toward me for a while, and then, about 100 yards from me, they turned straight in toward the foot of the frowning cliffs. From where I was, it seemed that they were bent upon self-destruction, since the roar of the breakers beating upon the perpendicular rock face appeared to offer only death to anyone who might venture within their relentless clutch. A mass of rock would soon hide them from my view, but so keen was the excitement of the instant that I could not refrain from crawling forward to a point whence I could watch the dashing of the small craft to pieces on the jagged rocks that loomed before her, although I risked discovery from above to accomplish my design. When I had reached a point where I could again see the dugout, I was just in time to see it glide unharmed between two needle-pointed sentinels of granite and float quietly upon the unruffled bosom of a tiny cove. Again I crouched behind a boulder to observe what would next transpire. Nor did I have long to wait. The dugout, which contained but 2 men, was drawn close to the rocky wall. A fibre rope, one end of which was tied to the boat, was made fast about a projection of the cliff face. Then the 2 men commenced the ascent of the almost perpendicular wall toward the summit several hundred feet above. I looked on in amazement, for splendid climbers though the cavemen of Pellucidar are, I never before had seen so remarkable a feat performed. Upwardly they moved without a pause to disappear at last over the summit. When I felt reasonably sure that they had gone for a while at least, I crawled from my hiding place and, at the risk of a broken neck, leaped and scrambled to the spot where their canoe was moored. If they had scaled that cliff, I could, and if I couldn't, I should die in the attempt. But when I turned to the accomplishment of the task, I found it easier than I had imagined it would be, since I immediately discovered that shallow hand and footholds had been scooped in the cliff's rocky face, forming a crude ladder from the base to the summit. At last I reached the top, and very glad I was too. Cautiously I raised my head until my eyes were above the cliff crest. Before me spread a rough mesa, liberally sprinkled with large boulders. There was no village in sight, nor any living creature. I drew myself to level ground and stood erect. A few trees grew among the boulders. Very carefully I advanced from tree to tree and boulder to boulder toward the inland end of the mesa. I stopped often to listen and look cautiously about me in every direction. How I wished that I had my revolvers and rifle! I would not have to worm my way like a scared cat toward Hooja's village, nor did I relish doing so now. But Diane's life might hinge upon the success of my venture, and so I could not afford to take chances. To have met suddenly with discovery and had a score or more of armed warriors upon me might have been very grand and heroic, but it would have immediately put an end to all my earthly activities, nor have accomplished aught in the service of Diane. Well, I must have traveled nearly a mile across that mesa without seeing a sign of anyone, when all of a sudden, as I crept around the edge of a boulder, I ran plump into a man, down on all fours like myself, crawling toward me. Chapter 10. The Raid on the Cave Prison. His head was turned over his shoulder as I first saw him. He was looking back toward the village. As I leaped for him, his eyes fell upon me. Never in my life have I seen a more surprised mortal than this poor caveman. Before he could utter a single scream of warning or alarm, I had my fingers on his throat and had dragged him behind the boulder, where I proceeded to sit upon him while I figured out what I had best do with him. He struggled a little at first, but finally lay still, and so I released the pressure of my fingers at his windpipe, for which I imagine he was quite thankful. I know that I should have been. I hated to kill him in cold blood, but what else I was to do with him I could not see, for to turn him loose would have been merely to have the entire village aroused and down upon me in a moment. The fellow lay looking up at me with the surprise still deeply written on his countenance. At last, all of a sudden, a look of recognition entered his eyes. "I have seen you before," he said. "I saw you in the arena at the Mahar's city of Phutra when the Thipdars dragged the tarag from you and your mate. I never understood that. Afterward, they put me in the arena with 2 warriors from Gombul." He smiled in recollection. "It would have been the same had there been 10 warriors from Gombul. I slew them, winning my freedom. Look!" He half turned his left shoulder toward me, exhibiting the newly healed scar of the Mahar's branded mark. "Then," he continued, "as I was returning to my people, I met some of them fleeing. They told me that one called Huja the Sly One had come and seized our village, putting our people into slavery. So I hurried hither to learn the truth. And, sure enough, here I found Huja and his wicked men living in my village, and my father's people but slaves among them. I was discovered and captured, but Huja did not kill me. I am the chief's son, and through me he hoped to win my father's warriors back to the village to help him in a great war he says that he will soon commence. Among his prisoners is Dian the Beautiful One, whose brother, Dakor the Strong One, chief of Amoz, once saved my life when he came to Thuria to steal a mate. I helped him capture her, and we are good friends. So when I learned that Dian the Beautiful One was Huja's prisoner, I told him that I would not aid him if he harmed her. Recently, one of Huja's warriors overheard me talking with another prisoner. We were planning to combine all the prisoners, seize weapons, and when most of Huja's warriors were away, slay the rest and retake our hilltop. Had we done so, we could have held it, for there are only 2 entrances, the narrow tunnel at one end and the steep path up the cliffs at the other. But when Huja heard what we had planned, he was very angry and ordered that I die. They bound me hand and foot and placed me in a cave until all the warriors should return to witness my death, but while they were away, I heard someone calling me in a muffled voice which seemed to come from the wall of the cave. When I replied, the voice, which was a woman's, told me that she had overheard all that had passed between me and those who had brought me thither, and that she was Dakor's sister and would find a way to help me. Presently, a little hole appeared in the wall at the point from which the voice had come. After a time, I saw a woman's hand digging with a bit of stone. Dakor's sister made a hole in the wall between the cave where I lay bound and that in which she had been confined, and soon she was by my side and had cut my bonds. We talked then, and I offered to make the attempt to take her away and back to the land of Sari, where she told me she would be able to learn the whereabouts of her mate. Just now I was going to the other end of the island to see if a boat lay there, and if the way was clear for our escape. Most of the boats are always away now, for a great many of Huja's men, and nearly all the slaves are upon the island of trees, where Huja is having many boats built to carry his warriors across the water to the mouth of a great river, which he discovered while he was returning from Phutra, a vast river that empties into the sea there. The speaker pointed toward the northeast. It is wide and smooth and slow-running almost to the land of Sari, he added. "And where is Dian the Beautiful One now?" I asked. I had released my prisoner as soon as I found that he was Huja's enemy, and now the pair of us were squatting beside the boulder while he told his story. "She returned to the cave where she had been imprisoned," he replied, "and is awaiting me there. There is no danger that Huja will come while you are away?" "Huja is upon the island of trees," he replied. "Can you direct me to the cave so that I can find it alone?" I asked. He said he could, and in the strange yet explicit fashion of the Pellucidarians, he explained minutely how I might reach the cave where he had been imprisoned, and through the hole in its wall reach Dian. I thought it best for but one of us to return, since 2 could accomplish but little more than 1, and would double the risk of discovery. In the meantime, he could make his way to the sea and guard the boat, which I told him lay there at the foot of the cliff. I told him to await us at the cliff top, and if Dian came alone to do his best to get away with her and take her to Sari, as I thought it quite possible that, in case of detection and pursuit, it might be necessary for me to hold off Hooja's people while Dian made her way alone to where my new friend was to await her. I impressed upon him the fact that he might have to resort to trickery or even to force to get Dian to leave me. But I made him promise that he would sacrifice everything, even his life, in an attempt to rescue Dakor's sister. Then we parted, he to take up his position where he could watch the boat and await Dian, I to crawl cautiously on toward the caves. I had no difficulty in following the directions given me by Huag, the name by which Dakor's friend said he was called. There was the leaning tree, my first point he told me to look for after rounding the boulder where we had met. After that I crawled to the balanced rock, a huge boulder resting upon a tiny base no larger than the palm of your hand. From here I had my first view of the village of caves. A low bluff ran diagonally across one end of the mesa, and in the face of this bluff were the mouths of many caves. Zigzag trails led up to them, and narrow ledges scooped from the face of the soft rock connected those upon the same level. The cave in which Huag had been confined was at the extreme end of the cliff nearest me. By taking advantage of the bluff itself, I could approach within a few feet of the aperture without being visible from any other cave. There were few people about at the time. Most of these were congregated at the foot of the far end of the bluff, where they were so engrossed in excited conversation that I felt but little fear of detection. However, I exercised the greatest care in approaching the cliff. After watching for a while until I caught an instant when every head was turned away from me, I darted, rabbit-like, into the cave. Like many of the man-made caves of Pellucidar, this one consisted of 3 chambers, one behind another, and all unlit except for what sunlight filtered in through the external opening. The result was gradually increasing darkness as one passed into each succeeding chamber. In the last of the 3, I could just distinguish objects, and that was all. As I was groping around the walls for the hole that should lead into the cave where Dian was imprisoned, I heard a man's voice quite close to me. The speaker had evidently but just entered, for he spoke in a loud tone, demanding the whereabouts of one whom he had come in search of. "Where are you, woman?" he cried. "Hooja has sent for you." And then a woman's voice answered him. "And what does Hooja want of me?" The voice was Dian's. I groped in the direction of the sounds, feeling for the hole. "He wishes you brought to the island of trees," replied the man, "for he is ready to take you as his mate." "I will not go," said Dian. "I will die first. I am sent to bring you, and bring you I shall." I could hear him crossing the cave toward her. Frantically, I clawed the wall of the cave, in which I was in an effort to find the elusive aperture that would lead me to Dian's side. I heard the sound of a scuffle in the next cave. Then my fingers sank into loose rock and earth in the side of the cave. In an instant, I realized why I had been unable to find the opening while I had been lightly feeling the surface of the walls. Dian had blocked up the hole she had made, lest it arouse suspicion and lead to an early discovery of Huag's escape. Plunging my weight against the crumbling mass, I sent it crashing into the adjoining cavern. With it came I, David, Emperor of Pellucidar. I doubt if any other potentate in a world's history ever made a more undignified entrance. I landed head-first on all 4s, but I came quickly and was on my feet before the man in the dark guessed what had happened. He saw me, though, when I arose and, sensing that no friend came thus precipitately, turned to meet me even as I charged him. I had my stone knife in my hand, and he had his. In the darkness of the cave there was little opportunity for a display of science, though even at that I venture to say that we fought a very pretty duel. Before I came to Pellucidar, I do not recall that I ever had seen a stone knife, and I am sure that I never fought with a knife of any description. But now I do not have to take my hat off to any of them when it comes to wielding that primitive yet wicked weapon. I could just see Dian in the darkness, but I knew that she could not see my features or recognize me, and I enjoyed in anticipation, even while I was fighting for her life and mine, her dear joy when she should discover that it was I who was her deliverer. My opponent was large, but he also was active and no mean knife man. He caught me once fairly in the shoulder. I carry the scar yet, and shall carry it to the grave. And then he did a foolish thing, for as I leaped back to gain a second in which to calm the shock of the wound, he rushed after me and tried to clinch. He rather neglected his knife for the moment in his greater desire to get his hands on me. Seeing the opening, I swung my left fist fairly to the point of his jaw. Down he went. Before ever he could scramble up again, I was on him and had buried my knife in his heart. Then I stood up, and there was Dian facing me and peering at me through the dense gloom. "You are not Wag," she exclaimed. "Who are you?" I took a step toward her, my arms outstretched. "It is I, Dian," I said. "It is David." At the sound of my voice she gave a little cry in which tears were mingled, a pathetic little cry that told me all without words how far hope had gone from her. And then she ran forward and threw herself in my arms. I covered her perfect lips and her beautiful face with kisses, and stroked her thick black hair, and told her again and again what she already knew, what she had known for years, that I loved her better than all else which two worlds had to offer. We couldn't devote much time, though, to the happiness of love-making, for we were in the midst of enemies who might discover us at any moment. I drew her into the adjoining cave. Thence we made our way to the mouth of the cave that had given me entrance to the cliff. Here I reconnoitred for a moment, and seeing the coast clear, ran swiftly forth with Dian at my side. We dodged around the cliff end, then paused for an instant, listening. No sound reached our ears to indicate that any had seen us, and we moved cautiously onward along the way by which I had come. As we went, Dian told me that her captors had informed her how close I had come in search of her, even to the land of awful shadow, and how one of Hooja's men who knew me had discovered me asleep and robbed me of all my possessions, and then how Hooja had sent 4 others to find me and take me prisoner. But these men, she said, had not yet returned, or at least she had not heard of their return. "Nor will you ever," I responded, "for they have gone to that place whence none ever returns." I then related my adventure with these 4. We had come almost to the cliff edge where Wag should be awaiting us when we saw 2 men walking rapidly toward the same spot from another direction. They did not see us, nor did they see Yuag, whom I now discovered hiding behind a low bush close to the verge of the precipice, which drops into the sea at this point. As quickly as possible, without exposing ourselves too much to the enemy, we hastened forward that we might reach Wag as quickly as they. But they noticed him first and immediately charged him, for one of them had been his guard, and they had both been sent to search for him, his escape having been discovered between the time he left the cave and the time when I reached it. Evidently they had wasted precious moments looking for him in other portions of the mesa. When I saw that the 2 of them were rushing him, I called out to attract their attention to the fact that they had more than a single man to cope with. They paused at the sound of my voice and looked about. When they discovered Dian and me, they exchanged a few words, and one of them continued toward Wag while the other turned upon us. As he came nearer, I saw that he carried in his hand one of my 6 shooters, but he was holding it by the barrel, evidently mistaking it for some sort of war club or tomahawk. I could scarce refrain a grin when I thought of the wasted possibilities of that deadly revolver in the hands of an untutored warrior of the Stone Age. Had he but reversed it and pulled the trigger, he might still be alive. Maybe he is, for all I know, since I did not kill him then. When he was about 20 feet from me, I flung my javelin with a quick movement that I had learned from Gak. He ducked to avoid it, and instead of receiving it in his heart, for which it was intended, he got it on the side of the head. Down he went, all in a heap. Then I glanced toward Huag. He was having a most exciting time. The fellow pitted against Yuag was a veritable giant. He was hacking and hewing away at the poor slave with a villainous-looking knife that might have been designed for butchering mastodons. Step by step, He was forcing Huag back toward the edge of the cliff with a fiendish cunning that permitted his adversary no chance to sidestep the terrible consequences of retreat in this direction. I saw quickly that in another moment Huag must deliberately hurl himself to death over the precipice or be pushed over by his foeman. And as I saw Huag's predicament, I saw too, in the same instant, a way to relieve him. Leaping quickly to the side of the fellow I had just felled, I snatched up my fallen revolver. It was a desperate chance to take, and I realized it in the instant that I threw the gun up from my hip and pulled the trigger. There was no time to aim. Huag was upon the very brink of the chasm. His relentless foe was pushing him hard, beating at him furiously with the heavy knife. And then the revolver spoke, loud and sharp. The giant threw his hands above his head, whirled about like a huge top, and lunged forward over the precipice. "And Huag?" He cast a single affrighted glance in my direction. Never before, of course, had he heard the report of a firearm. And with a howl of dismay, he, too, turned and plunged head-foremost from sight. Horror-struck, I hastened to the brink of the abyss just in time to see two splashes upon the surface of the little cove below. For an instant I stood there watching with Dian at my side. Then, to my utter amazement, I saw Huag rise to the surface and swim strongly toward the boat. The fellow had dived that incredible distance and come up unharmed. I called to him to await us below, assuring him that he need have no fear of my weapon, since it would harm only my enemies. He shook his head and muttered something which I could not hear at so great a distance, but when I pushed him he promised to wait for us. At the same instant Dian caught my arm and pointed toward the village. My shot had brought a crowd of natives on the run toward us. The fellow whom I had stunned with my javelin had regained consciousness and scrambled to his feet. He was now racing as fast as he could go back toward his people. It looked mighty dark for Dian and me with that ghastly descent between us and even the beginnings of liberty, and a horde of savage enemies advancing at a rapid run. There was but one hope. That was to get Dian started for the bottom without delay. I took her in my arms just for an instant. I felt somehow that it might be for the last time. For the life of me, I couldn't see how both of us could escape. I asked her if she could make the descent alone, if she were not afraid. She smiled up at me bravely and shrugged her shoulders. She afraid? So beautiful is she that I am always having difficulty in remembering that she is a primitive, half-savage cave girl of the Stone Age, and often find myself mentally limiting her capacities to those of the effete and over-civilized beauties of the outer crust. "And you?" she asked, as she swung over the edge of the cliff. "I shall follow you after I take a shot or two at our friends," I replied. "I just want to give them a taste of this new medicine which is going to cure Pellucidar of all its ills. That will stop them long enough for me to join you. Now hurry, and tell Huag to be ready to shove off the moment I reach the boat, or the instant that it becomes apparent that I cannot reach it. You, Dian, must return to Sari if anything happens to me, that you may devote your life to carrying out with Perry the hopes and plans for Pellucidar that are so dear to my heart. Promise me, dear." She hated to promise to desert me, nor would she, only shaking her head and making no move to descend. The tribesmen were nearing us. Huag was shouting up to us from below. It was evident that he realized from my actions that I was attempting to persuade Dian to descend, and that grave danger threatened us from above. "Dive!" he cried. "Dive!" I looked at Dian, and then down at the abyss below us. The cove appeared no larger than a saucer. How Huag ever had hit it, I could not guess. "Dive!" cried Huag. "It is the only way. There is no time to climb down."